The composer Edgar Varese famously defined music as organized sound. The phrasing captures what we feel is at the heart of musical experience across history and culture, the human act of intentionally organizing sounds into patterns. But consider the opening of River Song, performed and composed by Rosa Lee Timm. This piece presents an original song created in sign language by a deaf individual. The song has no oral equivalent. It was composed and performed purely in a signed language. Are songs composed in signed languages music, even when they don't involve any sounds? I'd like to suggest that songs like River Song reveal that, rather than organized sound, music can be better defined as organized movement. How might this change our understanding of musical expression? What does it mean for movement to become musical? Let's examine 3 key elements of signed music that Timm creates using the organized movements of her face, hands, and body. These elements are vocal quality, rhythm and meter, and melody. Each of these musical elements will look somewhat different in the context of a visual piece of music than they do in a piece of sounding music. Though Timm does not make any sounds with her oral voice, her signing voice is an important aspect of the musicality of River Song. Her facial expressions, the shape of her mouth, and the movement of her eyes and body create what we call tone of voice in oral expression. In the context of signed music, however, these elements are much more exaggerated and stylized than in regular conversation. For example, in the song's introduction, Timm's face is initially relaxed and neutral, as she signs that the sun is rising. As the rays of the sun touch the water, her facial expression changes, her mouth purses and her eyes squint, and as the rays make contact with the water, her eyes widen and her mouth briefly opens in a small O shape. Next, her face relaxes, showing contentment as she sings the song's refrain. Her hands move back and forth across the signing space as she shows the meandering course of the river. The river's flow becomes stronger and faster. Timm's cheeks puff out and her brow furrows, and her movements become larger and faster, taking up more of the vertical space. Then, her facial expression relaxes into an open smile as her hands flatten out and slow down, showing the river calming once again. In the second verse, Timm changes her facial expressions and body positioning when she is representing a change in tone. At this point in the song, there is a fierce competition between 2 boats. This change in Timm's vocal technique acts as a kind of temporal shift, creating a musical contrast between the song's formal sections. At this moment, for example, her mouth forms a tense, small O shape while her eyebrows are furrowed. Then her mouth opens wider and she sticks her tongue out to the right and her eyebrows raise, showing the boat's intense concentration. Her stance is crouched, her shoulders hunched forward. Changes in vocal quality thus perform an important function in the song, emphasizing the contrast between different formal sections. Timm's performance also uses visual rhythm and meter. Her holds and movements create a sense of beat, accent, and flow through visible rhythms. For example, at the end of the song's introduction, the periodic rhythmic movements of Timm's hands establish a regular pulse, which then slowly dissolves in a ritardando. Her movements suggest a simple quadruple meter with 4 beats per measure. This quadruple meter returns in the first verse, but now Timm is using different movements and a slightly different rhythm. In the following clip, Timm describes how she was inspired to establish the song's meter using a melodic contrast between 2 sides of the signing space and 2 different movement sizes and types. Timm's movements also create melodic lines in her music. In signed music, we might understand melody to involve the directed, purposeful movement of the body, creating dynamic kinetic lines that move through the signing space. In River Song, Timm uses her body's position in space to create the song's two main characters, a small boat and a larger boat. She uses the left side of the signing space to represent the little boat. The larger boat approaches from the right, so Timm moves her body to the right side of the melodic space. Her movements become firmer and larger, and her cheeks puff out, which is an aspect of vocal quality that shows the boat's larger size. Her mouth opens and her eyebrows raise in a haughty expression. As the two boats face off against each other, her eyes narrow to represent the feeling of competition between them. The second verse opens with a race between the boats. Timm uses her whole body to create circular movements back and forth across the signing space, as well as moving vertically up and down. Her facial expressions show the same circular motion. Her eyes widen and close, her cheeks puff out, and her mouth opens and closes. Her body then continues its rhythmic motion back and forth across the signing space as she shows the boats looking at each other. The movements of the smaller boat are strong and full of effort. Timm's movements have definite starting and ending points in space and feature circular, repetitive motions. Timm then shifts her body to the right, standing straight once more, representing the larger boat. Her expression becomes haughty and smug. She rolls her eyes as she looks down at the smaller boat. Her movements as the larger boat are much less strong and pronounced. Timm stays quite still, and her movements are not circular or repetitive. The tension rises as the competition heats up between the two boats, and Timm rapidly shifts between the two spaces. Now the two musical characters are intertwined with one another in a kind of counterpoint. She crouches, leans forward, and positions her body to the left to represent the smaller boat, using intense facial expressions. Her lips are pressed together, with her brows lowered and eyes wide. By contrast, she stands up straight and tall with her body positioned to the right to represent the larger boat, with a relaxed and smug expression. Her eyes are nearly closed and one corner of her mouth is turned up. The smaller boat then capsizes, and Timm's mouth opens in shock and disappointment. The larger boat laughs and smiles as its flag waves, signaling its victory. At the end of the song, Timm moves the larger boat from the right side of the signing space to the left side, crouching down to show the larger boat moving into the space of the smaller one. The larger boat lifts the smaller boat upright and rights its flag. By shifting between two melodic spaces and using different types of movements and facial expressions, Timm creates a musical transformation from a negative state of tense competition to a positive state of happiness and calm. She also creates a musical message of determination and hope against the challenges and setbacks of life, which is shown through the tenacity of the smaller boat. So what does it mean to call this signed song musical? To define music as a kind of organized movement rather than merely organized sound. Signed music reveals what we might call the resilience of music. This builds on Susan Golden-Meadow's discussion of the resilience of language. Susan Golden-Meadow has studied language development among deaf children who were not exposed to language, searching for universal or resilient language properties in humans. By resilient properties, Golden-Meadow refers to properties of language that appear in a child's communication regardless of whether that child is exposed to a language model that they are able to perceive. We might similarly understand there to be resilient properties of music, properties that appear whether or not a person is exposed to music in early childhood. My work on sign language music suggests that music, like language, boasts extraordinary resilience across modalities. Because of this resilience, Rosa Lee Timm is able to make the musical meaning of River Song clear, without the use of any sounds at all.